The Poor Historians podcast is brought to you by our fancy new sponsor, Artery Inc., a local Milwaukee company specializing in anatomical art-inspired apparel and products. Whether you're in healthcare or not, I'm sure they have a print you'd love to wear or a piece of art for your home to show your interest in medicine and the human body. Go to www.arteryinc.com, check out their stuff, and use our 10% off code, PHPOD, all one word, to show your support for our show, as well as for our very cool sponsor. Hey, they ship all over the U.S. and internationally.
Poor historians, poor historians. We look at cases throughout history. It's just Max in there and Mike and me. You gotta listen, you don't have to read. Poor historians, poor historians, poor historians.
Hello there, listener. So, I'll give you a little rundown on what's going on today's show. We had a lovely conversation with Dr. Laurie Fink, who is a PhD over at the Science Museum of Minnesota. And we talked to her about a lot of the museum's collections that had to do with medical history or anatomy, and had us a fascinating conversation, which I think you will all enjoy. We're going to be talking a lot about not only some of the anatomy specimens they have, but, how they get them. And a lot of our conversation is actually going to focus on a very special collection unique to their museum called the Collection of Questionable Medical Devices. And this is a collection of items or devices or things that have to do with quackery. We're going to talk about Dr. Harvey Kellogg, the cereal guy, and what he has to do with shaking chairs. We're going to talk about what orgone is, or I guess kind of what it isn't. And we're going to talk about some other devices like radionics and all these sort of strange areas of that realm of, quote, medicine, end quote. So with that, let's just jump to the interview. Thanks for joining us on today's episode. We are here with Dr. Laurie Fink, PhD from the Science Museum of Minnesota, who was kind enough to take some time out today to talk about some of their most interesting collections. Hello, Laurie. How are you today?
I'm great. How are you today?
I'm enjoying flurries of snow and the beginnings and feelings of winter at the time we're recording, so I'm doing that well today.
Well, it's 18 degrees and sunny here in the Twin Cities. So,
hey, at least the sun is out, right? That's the key.
I was gonna say we don't have that right now. We're doing better than 18 degrees. So thank you for framing that well. I feel much better.
I was just going to say
you
can't complain about winter weather with somebody from Minnesota. You just can't.
No, not really. I remember moving up here and I thought the sun was a cruel joke because it actually means it feels colder outside. I never figured that out, but I learned it in Minnesota though. That's for sure.
Yeah, that's the truth.
Yeah, but it's a dry cold. I don't know. It's not a dry cold here.
It's so moist in Wisconsin.
Well, weather aside. So Laurie, we want to start by kind of asking you a little bit, tell us a little bit about how you got started with the museum, the Science Museum of Minnesota up there. How did you wander in there and just they offered you a job, or how did it get on your radar?
Well, I grew up in the Twin Cities, and so I grew up going to the Science Museum of Minnesota, not the building that we are currently in, but the previous site for it. And so it was always a place of, endearment in my heart, and I loved it. I had great memories. And it was kind of funny because as I was finishing up my PhD, I realized I did not want to be an academic scientist, and I wasn't sure what I wanted to be. And so in the process of figuring that out, I stumbled across a temporary position at the Science Museum of Minnesota to do exhibit development for their human body gallery. And I thought, well, why not? The worst thing that could happen is I do a postdoc 3 years later when the funding runs out, and I'll go from there. So here I am 22 years later and still at the Science Museum. And I've had lots of different roles since then, from exhibit development and project management. And now I lead our Center for Research and Collections, which is all of the scientists and collections professionals.
Yeah, the word temporary is really doing a lot of lifting in that sentence.
Yes.
So you said you did I hear you correctly to say that you were behind the founding of the Human Body Gallery? Is that correct?
Well, not the founding, but I started at the museum a year after they moved into the current building. And so there were already exhibits in the Human Body Gallery, but a lot of the exhibitions that have since been developed for that space, I was the project lead for it.
Well, gotcha. It's a really nice segue because one of the first things I wanted to kind of ask you a little bit about is about the Human Body Gallery. I was able to look through the website and I haven't been there on the ground yet, but looking at some of the exhibits you have, can you talk a little bit about what some of the interesting things folks might see there, or maybe a few of your favorite exhibits in the Human Body Gallery?
Well, sure. So first is you should come and see it. But we, so it's been changing and it's had many iterations. What you would see there now is we have a small exhibition about human brain, early childhood human brain development. So really looking at that 0 to 5 and thinking about how the brain develops instead of just having the milestones of when you crawl or when you walk. It's like what's going on in your brain. So that's one area. Another area is all about human tissues. And that was actually the project that I was first hired on to develop. So I sometimes look at those exhibit components and think, oh, what was I thinking? And you might imagine what it would be like to write a PhD thesis and label copy at the same time. And that's different parts of your brain working. And so I think, that's too long. I shouldn't have written so much for that. But, we learn. But that's really fun because it's thinking about all human tissues and the types of tissues. And we even have what I call the jazz band, where there's different jazz band members made out of steel. And then we have plastinated organs and tissues in there. So you can see the 4 different types of tissues in the 4 different jazz band members. So that's kind of a hit.
So the jazz band, so they're like kind of steel frames with the plasticized organs placed where they would be, basically.
Oh, that's cool. Exactly. Yeah, to highlight the different tissue types. Yeah.
Yep. And then by the idea, what we were thinking, probably your average visitor doesn't get this, but the thought behind it was just like jazz band members kind of play together to make the music beautiful. You need all of these different tissue types to come together to have your body work.
I really like that subtext.
Which tissue is the lead singer? That's what I want to know. The front person for the Axl Rose of the tissues. Which one is the?
I don't remember, but it's a really good question.
The question is what makes up the drummer? That's what I want to know.
We do have a drummer. That's the member in the center. So anyway, so then there's and then we have right now an area that's all about how you make healthcare decisions, which I think we're going to talk about a little bit more.
Yeah, I would think I like to avoid them as much as possible. I don't know about Aaron or Mike.
Yeah, just to activate a little PTSD, actually. I was like, oh no, I can't have that discussion right now.
Yeah, just rote memory and fear.
We like to inspire confidence in all of the patients.
Which decisions and how much are you going to second guess my decisions? That's the question.
That is a very interesting area, especially because there's so much weight that carries on those decisions. And especially from an emergency department standpoint, there's a lot of those decisions that have to be made pretty quickly. So I actually think Mike's not totally wrong when there is at least a little bit of anxiety and rote memorization that you have to fall back on. And sometimes that's a healthy thing.
So, Laurie, is that more like healthcare decisions made individually by doctors or as a society?
Individually, as a just as a person navigating their own healthcare, and really, it's about evidence-based decision making. That's where our collection of questionable medical devices comes into it. So we use that as a hook to get people into, because otherwise it's kind of a dull subject and who wants to talk about how do I make healthcare decisions? So we use these questionable medical devices to get people to have meaningful conversations about their own healthcare decision making, so that when they're in a time of crisis or needing to make a decision, it's not something new that they haven't thought about before.
Well, it seems like a huge public service because a lot of people will come into these decisions and they're just not prepared for all the variables, and to have some background or some sense of what your desires are as a patient is a huge benefit for them, because they're very difficult decisions, and we kind of we do definitely try to explain as much as we can, but you're if somebody has some foreknowledge, that's really great.
I like the bait and switch too. We should give out free cookies, and then people get their blood sugar checked, and they don't get the cookie. No, you still get the cookie. Perfect. We're learning.
Many people may not know, or or if they haven't read a particularly popular book that I'm thinking of, where does a museum come across your anatomical specimens? It's not a similar case of like people walking in and then just like leaving their liver behind or anything like that. There's probably some process to that. I think it might be interesting to discuss. How does the museum come across the tissue displays and different organs that are on display in one of these type galleries?
Yeah,
and Max is asking for a friend.
Very good question. The ones that we have on display, they came from two different things. One, we have the tissue slices that actually came from the people who made the Body Worlds exhibition. And so we contracted with them, and they procured them for us through their informed consent and all that, and got them to us. So that's the slices are that way. The actual organs, we have a brain and some fat and a bone and a heart, and those we were partnering with the University of Minnesota, and they're actually on a long-term loan to us, so they don't belong to the museum. They're lent from the university.
Organ loaning programs.
I'm gonna want that back. I'm gonna want it back.
You bring
later.
up the important point there is the informed consent, and what a lot of people don't realize is how when you go, if you're in medical school, you're doing an anatomical dissection on a cadaver and or a specific organ and those sort of things. It's a big deal, and it's treated I think overall very respectfully. But you have to appreciate that a lot of folks who have donated their bodies to science and become anatomical specimens. It's the forethought that went in, the consent that goes into it. It's very interesting, and I'll admit a little bit morbid, but I think once you learn a little bit more about it, it sort of demystifies it in a very, very positive way, so that you can have these things on display to bring interest in the folks who come into the museum and see a human heart for the first time, and I think it's just kind of interesting to think about how that heart on display got there,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And I'm thankful for the people who were willing to donate their organs for these educational purposes.
Absolutely.
Because it fascinates people in a way that just talking about it or seeing a picture, it's not the same.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. Well, you foreshadowed very succinctly one of the main areas that I think we were interested in exploring at your museum, because we haven't done a lot of this on the show yet. And that area has to do with quackery, that being medicine medicine in quotes, that is based on little to no actual science or evidence. It has a very strong part in medical history, and it also still exists today, right? So it's still very prevalent. And so but there was sort of seems like a heyday almost of kind of late 19th century, early 20th century, when a lot of these quackery devices were really popularized. And your museum has a whole exhibit basically devoted to this. So let's talk about, what was it called again?
It's called Weighing the Evidence.
Gotcha. Weighing the evidence. And it's like debunk devices, remedies, and like ideologies, I think I saw somewhere on the website. So there was a couple of things I asked you about, sort of like a few different devices. So we'll talk about that. But one thing that you brought up to me was a gentleman named Bob McCoy, who, if you don't mind, can you share a little bit about who Bob McCoy was and what this has to do with the questionable medical devices there on display?
No, I would love to. Bob McCoy, he was quite a character. And for most people who have lived in the Twin Cities for a long time, they will know the Museum of Questionable Medical Devices. And he started that. I don't remember the year. Yeah,
I'll look it up while you're talking. It's all good.
Okay. So he started the museum, and it started with, he collected some psychograph machines. Now, the psychograph machines were machines that used the theory of
Is it phrenology?
Is it phrenology?
Phrenology. Thank you. Yeah. So he used the theory of phrenology, or he didn't. People used the theory of phrenology, which was examining the bumps and the things on your head to talk about personality. So this machine, the psychograph, supposedly reads those bumps and tells you about your personality. And so it was these machines that he collected first to start the Museum of Questionable Medical Devices. Once he started it, then he started collecting all kinds of different questionable medical devices for the museum. He was not a physician himself, but his wife was a surgeon. And so presumably she had a lot to do with talking about
kept
what
him on the right track, I'm sure.
bringing
Yeah.
in. But it was this quirky place that was just chock full of all of these devices. And as a kid, I remember going in and just, you turn a corner, you'd be amazed, like, wow, it was in an older building with lots of tiny rooms. And so you'd go into each of these rooms and just be wowed with each thing. He was such a character that he was actually featured on the Letterman show a few times, and he's got some great little videos.
Yep.
And so in 2002, he donated the collection to the Science Museum of Minnesota. And it actually sat in our warehouse for quite some time until we displayed a few pieces here and there. But for the most part, it was in our warehouse. And it wasn't till I made this connection of using those to think about healthcare decisions that I wrote a grant proposal to the National Institutes of Health for their Science Education and Partnership Awards.
I've heard of that institution.
Yeah, yes. Well, and they funded it. So it was their funding that allowed us to create this exhibition. They liked the idea of using this quirky collection to talk about healthcare decisions.
Well, I agree with them. And I did see those. I did look at a couple of the clips of Bob McCoy on the Letterman show. It was really funny. He's got that. Was he a Minnesota native? I wasn't sure, but he seems to have that kind of like Minnesota niceness to him. Yeah. And, he's trying to work around Letterman, doing Letterman things. And it's, he's trying to like show him these devices, and Letterman's like trying to crack jokes, and I got the sense of, I was like, just sit in the chair. Come on.
Yeah.
So maybe he was doing the deadpan delivery. Like it works
I think
with
a little
that.
bit, because he was very much like, you would come in and he would invite you to sit in the psychograph, and he's very animated.
He had to tone it down a little bit for Letterman.
Yeah.
He didn't want to upstage him. I get it.
Right.
We've all been there. But no, he definitely seems like a character. And I think your idea is a very good one, because I think that using some of these questionable devices to kind of highlight how you make an informed decision about whether XYZ device may do something or may not do something is important, because we've seen a lot of misinformation nowadays. I don't know if you guys have been on the internet at all, but there is a fair amount of it out there.
Was there something people were arguing about recently? I don't recall.
I think the question I have though is like, these quack devices, do you think that the person developing them thought it was quackery, or was this something that was going to change people's lives, and then down the road found out that it didn't do anything, or they were wrong?
So it's definitely a mix of those two things. And we had long conversations as we were developing the exhibition, like, how do we talk about that? And because there were plenty of people who really truly believed in what they were creating and wanted people to benefit from it. And I think that we're going to talk about John Harvey Kellogg in a minute. And I think he probably falls more into that category. And then there's others who truly just wanted to make $1, and they're really the charlatans. And so there's both in there. We decided to include both examples in the exhibition. We were also really careful to only put things in there that really were but really they did not work. There was not science behind it, because we didn't want anybody to come out of the museum being confused or saying something like, well, the Science Museum said that these magnets are going to cure everything that's wrong with me, or whatever. We didn't want to walk away. So we wanted to be really clear that everything in there does not have scientific evidence behind it. And really the only exception to that is when we talk about radioactive material, and that's more like people were drinking radioactive water at the time. But we talk about how it's that radiation that allows us to do traditional X-rays and things like that. So there was a nugget of something there, but it was taken to a whole different level.
And I think on that point too, you highlight something that, I think a lot, and I, as a physician who I have I just have a fondness for learning about quack medicine. I don't know why it is, but even though there's plenty there that's fairly easy to point and, laugh at. The fact of the matter is that a lot of it arises out of the places where modern medicine, whether it was modern medicine in the 1920s or modern medicine in the 2020s, has not been able to bring a good conclusion to so many various illnesses. So people reach for things that seem to be that just seem to be almost magical because there's desperation, and I can empathize with that. I think I can understand how folks who, if they're like Dr. Kellogg and they may have had the heart in the right place, even though we'll talk about the Kellogg chair in a second, but even though it was kind of in retrospect silliness, it may have been coming from a good place. And as you mentioned, there may be some slight nuggets of these devices did something. They may not have been a helpful thing, but at least it caused some sort of reaction in a person and therefore seemed to, on the surface, affect a change, even if we can look back and say, yeah, not helpful. But I can get how you get there is really what I'm trying to say.
Do you guys sort of address the placebo effect in the exhibit?
We absolutely address the placebo effect. And then we actually have a really cute video, one of those whiteboard videos that a partner with us at our Twin Cities Public Television channel did for us that talks about the placebo effect. And I can
it's to me, it's a fascinating effect. I think one of my favorite studies about it was, I think they did a study, and I shouldn't say this without citing it, but they actually had people take something they knew was a placebo, and they still got an effect out of it. Just the very act of doing something still gave them some. So I don't know. We always talk about the placebo effect as quote unquote nothing, but it's really not. It's this really amazing intersection between mind and body. And that's, to me, that's where a lot of these things probably work.
Yeah. And it could be, all hope based. I mean, just think about us when we see people with abdominal pain and they're writhing, you get the labs and they're all fine. You get a CT and it's normal. And then when you go back in the room, they're like, oh, I feel great.
I'm fine.
That's not a placebo
because they've had that
effect,
anxiety lifted that something terrible is happening. So there's, I guess that's the negative shadow of that in the ER. Lots of times people are like, oh no, I actually feel better now that I know it's not something, that you can see or that's really wrong.
Changing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like I said, I think it should be fairly easy with enough thought to empathize with that and how we get to some of the stranger corners of quackery in medicine. And this isn't the strangest one, I will say, based on some of the other ones you sent me. But let's talk about the Kellogg chair. And is this was designed specifically to eat cereal in, or
no? Although his cereal was part. So like he had these like retreat centers that people would go to feel better. And there were all these different regimens and things that they needed to do. And
and he being Dr. Kellogg, correct?
Oh, yes.
No worries.
Dr. Kellogg. And part of it, so, I mean, that's where the cereal kind of came from. He and his brother would run these centers together. The other thing is that you're supposed to sit on his vibratory chairs. The main cure for the reason you would sit on the vibratory chairs is to stay regular and not get constipated.
He was very bowel obsessed. Yeah.
He did go further and say that it could cure all that ails you, like many of these different devices and the creators of these devices. But it's literally, so this was one of the things where we have the chair in our collection, and then we recreated it so visitors could sit in it and experience what it was like.
How much does this thing vibrate? Is this like how many? I don't know. I don't know how to measure. I mean, I guess there's a frequency to it.
It hurts, yeah.
Well, if you were talking and you were sitting on the chair, your voice would sound all funny vibrating.
Okay. So it's
we're not torturing our museum visitors.
It's not like a mechanical bull or anything like that.
Yeah.
Right. No, it's not like that. And the original chair, the one that's part of the collection, we didn't sit on it. And so the guess on how much it vibrates was just from looking at the motor because we couldn't even plug it in. It's so old and we wouldn't want to damage a object from the collection. But so it was our best guess on how much it would vibrate and not making visitors really uncomfortable.
Do you need a volunteer to try plugging it in? Because I'll say Michael do it. Michael do it. Yeah. We'll throw that out there.
Okay.
It can't be
I'll
that
let
bad.
the folks in our production shop know.
Yeah, I've been
It's
zapped before.
electricity. Yeah, come on.
Right.
That'll probably only hit you up to the elbow.
So basically, my understanding, he basically thought that by sitting in this this vibrating humming chair, it would help your intestinal movement, correct? Like the
Correct.
peristalsis. I think the interesting. So as you mentioned, there's maybe there's sort of a connection of I can see where there might be some truth to that. Not that I think he was giving this forethought, but when folks go through a surgery and they've had their bowels either worked upon, like you've taken out an appendix, or you've had to disconnect and remove part of the large intestine or something like that, one of the things that they like to do in the hospital as quickly as possible is get people up and walking. Because we know that if you lay in bed and you're not walking, it does not stimulate intestinal movement. But the more you're walking, the more you're active, it sort of like brings those systems back online. Now, I don't know that sitting in a vibrating chair is the same stimulus as walking around and those sort of things. It's, just because one movement may cause intestines to change their speed and that sort of thing doesn't mean that another one would. But there's sort of a hint of a hint of a hint that there could have been some connection. But that being said,
I sense a business. I think we should do a randomized controlled trial and get Kellogg chairs in every hospital room, and we can sell them.
And I have to describe the chair a little.
As someone who has had abdominal surgery before, the thought of sitting in this chair
would be terrible. It would be terrible.
No, yeah, I couldn't condone that. No, because it's literally a wooden desk chair sitting on a platform with a motor on it, and it's the motor that then shakes the whole chair.
It could be any chair on that platform for the most part. It's not like a cool throne. It's not like ornate.
It looks kind of like an electric chair.
Yeah,
kind of. You put the thing on the top.
Yeah, no, it's even got the picture I'm looking at has a post behind it too, so that's a little uncomfortable looking.
Oh, the post is probably just the electricity running to the chair.
Oh, good.
Oh, sure, no problem. That's just electricity behind you. Don't worry about that. It's not a problem.
And this, roughly, when was this made? Was this? I didn't write that down.
Like early 20th century.
Okay. Yeah. So I'm sure the electrical, the electrical wiring and everything is totally up to snuff and not coated in completely flammable cloth and asbestos. I don't know what they coated those electrical wires with.
Yes, asbestos. Yeah.
But here's the thing. So for pulmonary issues, vibration can.
Yeah, true. I
was just thinking that because I'm
interesting.
Pulled up the Kellogg book and
Capella,
he's got
we have
device.
a lot of modern devices that'll do that for sure.
Yeah, we basically it sort of like oscillates the chest. Don't they call them oscillators? They oscillate the chest to try to like loosen up mucus and stuff. And so you know what? Maybe he just made the chair for the wrong reason.
Maybe. I'm looking back because like he was really. It says to treat constipation in particular, but his he went on beyond his constipation.
He's like one of these folks who make it his own episode just because there's a lot of levels of strangeness behind cornflakes that I think there may be enough interest for a full episode. I do think
we did address him with the colonics because wasn't he doing the yogurt enemas and we just briefly talked about.
So maybe
we have only touched on all the wonders that he
it looks like there's like at least for the time there are studies. There's a whole host of studies of mechanical therapy for things. It does the
things and stuff.
This is the interesting part of quackery and current misinformation in science and so on is how often you'll be able to find a source, right?
Yeah, right.
That sort of supports.
And there is a study. Yep.
Like,
well, you guys, let's move on to something that has a lot more foundational research to it, like the Orgone accumulator box. Now, before we even talk about what any of that means, I put a picture here for my co-hosts in the notes here. You describe what you're seeing.
It's a sauna.
It's actually like a stand-up sauna. Yeah,
it's like the fridge that Punky Brewster got locked in.
I'm seeing like a wood rectangle with a chair in it.
Yeah,
and metal inside, metal lined. Yeah.
Is this similar to the one you guys have there, Laurie?
Yeah, it is. And we have the one that's in our collection that nobody touches. And then we have the one that we recreated with instructions that we got off of the internet, just FYI.
Ooh.
Was it the dark web or was that?
You can just Google how to make an orgone accumulator box and you too can find it. It's literally a wooden...
This looks really sophisticated. I'm surprised by that.
It's a wooden box that has steel wool and then a metal lining in between the wood, and you have to have the right metal and the right wood and put it together just the right way if you want orgone to accumulate in the box.
I should probably jump into what is orgone. I looked it up, but
it's this mysterious gas, maybe. It's blue, but you can't see it. It's invisible. And it just gives you everything you need.
Okay,
nice.
Mysterious force. I read, that's kind of what I read about it. This like they were sort of like think of it like a life force or like this sort of unspecified energy.
Wait, so it's midichlorians?
Yeah, it's like midichlorians. It's very.
Jeez.
I love the Star Wars tie-ins.
There's no Star Wars reference.
You know what's funny though? If you look at the website for the museum, there's Star Wars.
Is there?
Yeah.
Well, good. That's excellent. There should be
multiple reasons to go.
I mean, midichlorians make sense, but orgone, when I was reading about it, is fascinating as kind of a strange quackery idea. I did look up some background stuff about kind of how the idea was developed, more or less. Do you have that at the top of your head there, Laurie?
Not how it was developed, no.
Or the background behind it. So according to also the internet, the idea of orgone was sort of proposed in the 1930s, apparently by a gentleman named Wilhelm Reich.
Correct.
Who he was a doc, but he was a psychoanalyst. And it said I couldn't see that he trained under Freud, but he was kind of like the second generation of psychoanalysts that kind of took Freud's theory and ran with it. And yeah, a lot of like descriptions of what orgone is it's this sort of nebulous kind of definition. But one of my favorite terms, because I know what the words mean, but I'm just trying to conceptualize it, is that it's the anti-entropic. Like entropy is increased randomness or chaos. And if this is anti that, it's sort of like this, I don't know, life energy substance that gives organization to biological matter is the best I can come up with looking at all this stuff. But the idea, I think, is what you sit in this box and then like the universe channels this, it conserves this energy or it increases it, correct?
It kind of channel, so it's just out in as Wilhelm Reich believed, it's out there. It's in by sitting in these accumulator boxes, or there's other things that we can talk about in a minute that you can get now. But in these, it brings that orgone energy into the box so that you could benefit from its healing powers.
What do you do when you're in the box? You just sit there? Is it?
You sit, well, so this is the point I like to make. You go into this box and it really is like dens. You can be in a loud museum, go into the box, even though there's a cutout window, and there's no glass or anything, it's just open, and sit in there, and you can't hear anything that's going on in the museum anymore. And you're supposed to sit there quietly for X amount of time. And then you're going to be re-energized and rejuvenated.
But can you take your
terrified?
Phone in
there?
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, it almost, I wonder if some of the benefit, if there was, would just be enforcing, I mean, essentially meditation, right? Because basic I'm not a meditation expert at all, but when we took the class in college, the first form was just sitting and breathing. And that was how you kind of started the concept. And if that's what you did, you probably get a fair amount of benefit out of an orgone box.
Aaron, that's exactly the point I like to make when I'm, walking through the exhibition with people. Because, if you think about how often, if you just stop and calm yourself a little bit in a quiet space, you do.
And your phone's probably blocked off. If it's the right kind of metal, is it a Faraday cage where your phone doesn't get any service in there?
Yeah,
it's a steel wool. Yeah, absolutely. Well, you're not. I think to your point, Aaron, that's there's something to that. I mean, there's a place here in town that does the like sensory deprivation chambers. You can pay for an hour where you float.
Is it the jail?
No, it's different.
That's solitary. That's different.
Oh, solitary confinement.
Mike, we weren't going to get into your backstory while we were on the air here. I mean, I thought you wanted to keep that to yourself.
It was a dark and stormy night.
But they have these chambers you can pay and you float in there, and it basically seals you in. You have these noise canceling, and you just basically float in silence and suspension. And a lot of people who are very normal, people that like I know personally who have done this, they enjoy it. And for me, I'm a person who I don't like sitting in the quiet because it makes me very anxious. So I like to have constant, this chamber would be a nightmare for me because I don't like sitting with my thoughts. It doesn't, but I'm sure if I did,
like
I would
13th.
feel different by the time I was done. Yeah, I don't like the quiet of my own mind. I like a lot of the noise in the background, but I can totally understand that. Like if you forced me into this box, and let's say I just sat there for an hour and was like, okay, I'm in the quiet box. I can't check my phone. I can't do any of this stuff. I would probably feel different on the way out. I'd be mad at whoever locked me in there. I guarantee you that. So, but I do get that, as Aaron was saying, there's probably something to that whether it's healthy, whether it's not healthy, whether it does something positive or negative, it does something to sit quietly and in a kind of sensory deprived state. It does something, and so I would imagine you do feel different. I don't know if you feel better.
Did he sell these then, or did he just give instructions on how to build them? Like, here, try this. I think
he sold them.
He did, okay.
Yeah,
because that's why he gave the instructions. Like, it has to be made perfectly, otherwise it's not going to work.
Correct.
Yeah, and only I can make it perfectly.
Yeah,
and that's clever. I think that's part of the possibly part of the grift. Now, Laurie, do you think Wilhelm was one of the guys who was trying to make more money? Do you think? Do you have a sense of?
Well, you never know for sure, but I suspect that he was more of he really believed in it. Maybe it's just because he's got the title and that he's a medical professional, and I give him a little more cred. Mm-hmm. But I don't know. He wasn't one of the ones that. He didn't go to jail for it or anything.
That's always good. Maybe he had a businessman friend that liked it. And he's like, oh, Wilhelm, these are going to fly off the shelf.
Oh, no, wait, I take that back. I'm looking back through. So he was marketing them for treating serious illnesses. And that eventually he did end up in prison because he ignored an FDA order to stop selling the accumulators.
No.
Uh-oh.
No, I take
a simple oversight.
Yeah.
Well, and I think that highlights, a lot of folks may come down on the side of, well, some of these quack remedies, what's the harm? But there is some serious harm when, especially, you're ignoring things like, I think almost a lot of, I'm sure it comes across in the ER. I mean, a lot of us, I've definitely taken care of a patient or two in my time that had a serious diagnosis, like a bad cancer, and had ignored it for a year or so because they went instead for some alternative therapies when, there was a certain type of cancer that could have been cured, truthfully, with a high probability at an early stage. But instead, they were convinced by somebody to go to some other place. I mean, this could literally be another country to get experimental treatments, which can include things like enemas or whatnot, and unfortunately that can result in then later a stage of cancer that can't be treated, and so we'll poke some fun at some of these things, but there is a potential serious harm to diving the wrong way in some of these treatments.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's sitting in the orgone accumulator isn't going to be harmful itself, but it's exactly what are you ignoring or not doing that could be treated. And the other thing about these orgone accumulators is you can still buy orgone accumulator hats and blankets and things on the internet today.
I'm looking that up.
And so we actually had right next to the old devices had another case with things that the museum just purchased right off the internet to show, because the other thing we didn't want people leaving the exhibition saying was, oh, those people in the past, they were so stupid, but we're so much smarter. We're not going to fall for that. And so we wanted to put those modern equivalents on display as well.
It's a thing. Oh man, they are. Okay, that one's just a hat that says Orgone on it. That's $15. That seems, but yes, I see some very elaborate examples here online.
I saw an Orgonite medallion for $350. I was like,
we are in the wrong business. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, all right, we'll workshop that one later. I think the next item I'm going to say seems to be more on the definite scam, and probably leaning into the scam. Maybe I'm wrong, but what about Ruth Drown's radionics machine?
Yeah,
am I wrong there?
Yeah, that is definitely the for sure scam, and it was actually started. She modeled her stuff after Albert Abrams in his Oscilla class, but it was all, radios were new at the time. And so something new, not well understood. And
this is early 20th century again, correct?
Right, yes.
Okay.
Yep. And so Abrams and then Drowns kind of pulled on that string a little bit and took advantage of it. And theirs was both their machines that relied on radio or radio waves were both diagnostics and cures. They could treat people, and they both could both do while you were in the room with them or from afar, depending on how. And Ruth Drowns, she actually ended up getting caught because there was an undercover sting operation where, quote unquote, mother came in with blood samples of her children and wanted them diagnosed. And I forget what Ruth Drowns said was wrong with them.
I looked it up. So she said that like 2 of them had chicken pox. I think there was 3 samples. 2 of them had chicken pox and 1 had mumps.
Okay,
or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds right.
Just
and
taking
then
a guess.
It turns out it was like a duck, a pig, and a chicken's blood sample. They weren't kids, they weren't human, and that wasn't what was going on. And so she ended up going to jail for that.
Well, and this was like you would show up, you'd give the blood samples, and she'd be like, I'll put it in the machine, and then I will treat you from afar.
Wait, you have to bring the blood in? How do you get it?
I mean, mailed?
Yeah,
it's early 1900s. Yeah.
I mean, they had needles.
I know that, but like do that at home or?
But it would bring it, and it all, some of them also worked with that particular story was about a blood sample. She also did saliva, was another way to do it. I don't know how, for the people that she was treating from afar, I'm sure there was some protocol you had to go through. She probably didn't actually have the samples, but they probably put it on a steel plate or something. I mean, I don't know.
I'm sure they had something that looked,
Yeah, they just emailed it.
Yeah, right.
And like describing this device. So especially if you put yourself in like 1910 or whatnot, I think when a lot of this came around, you've got this, in the one I'm looking at, I've seen many iterations of it, but this is like a suitcase sized, like if you imagine a suitcase that you opened up and one side had just an array of dials and like speakery looking things and lights. And I'm sure for the time it was like, wow, that looks like technology that has to do something.
Yep.
And I saw other examples that were like a giant desk worth of knobs and whatnot.
So that's what we have. The electrometabograph, I think is what that's called. And it's huge.
You say electrometabograph? Okay.
And it's huge. And it has all kinds of buttons and knobs and things. But if you open up the back of it, there's nothing there.
Oh my gosh.
I saw one that when they were like apparently related to the trial, they would bring in these devices and they would be like, all right, let's open them up and look at, there'd be like all these things would have like one wire that would connect and complete a circuit, and like you would grab it and light a light bulb, and so it was like, oh, well, that did something, but this was complete smoke and mirrors. I mean, this wasn't even like trying hard to make up a pseudoscience. This was just.
But maybe she believed it. Maybe she had, psychosis or delusional thinking, and she thought, that's the interesting
I think she might
side
just
of
want to make money. Simple things being simple. Occam's razor, right?
Well, and I looked into Ruth Drown a little bit, and I have to say, as so she had a background as a chiropractor and as an osteopath, and I'm a DO as well.
I was going to give you a hard time about that, Max, but I also ran into the term non-physician osteopath, so I'm like, oh, okay, so
yeah, I did the
manipulation part, but I don't think she was the same as a DO.
Either way,
let's avoid having all the DOs come for our podcast.
Yeah, exactly. We'll do that episode soon enough. But no, I mean, so she, had some questionable, maybe some degree of medical background, although it's not clear. And she was brought to trial in the 1960s, I believe 1963, because of that undercover catch of like, these aren't even human specimens. This machine does nothing. They're opening them up, and there's really nothing there. And I believe she died before the conclusion of the trial, is what I read. She was never sentenced.
I believe that.
I think that's what I read. So they're do these devices do still exist? Like, I think people still market these. Am I wrong?
We don't have a modern one of those on display.
Okay, I might be wrong.
Plenty of old ones.
I might be thinking, what I'm probably thinking of? I'm probably thinking of the next device. I think we can wrap up our mini tour of the questionable devices with the violet ray. which
Yes.
this is definitely still made today.
Absolutely is. And it's probably the most donated, or not, we don't take them anymore, but we used to get calls all the time. Do you want our old Violet Ray? And we have so many of them. But this is another one where we have the older ones on display, and then we created one that you can try right there in the museum. And what it reminds, just like to describe what it looks like, it's a handle, and then there's a glass tube, and these glass tubes are in all kinds of shapes. Sometimes they look like a comb, sometimes they kind of look like a mushroom end, and they've got all these different attachments that you can put on. But when you turn them on, it looks like, those, when you go to a science museum, often they'd have those big glass balls with the electricity, and you put your hand on it, and it would all the color would move towards your hand. That's exactly
Spencer's gifts. You put the hand on, and it it looks, you pretend like you're commanding electricity. It's I kind of wish I had one right now.
So it looks like that, but a small like wand, and then it basically gives you little shocks when you touch it.
I was watching videos of this, and it actually comes from a guy I think a lot of people have heard of, right? The first one was developed by Nikola Tesla. Is that correct?
Oh,
at least that's what I read. So apparently there was a prototype of one of these at the World's Columbian Exposition of it in 1893, introduced by Tesla.
Huh.
That's as far as the guy who pioneered, arcing electricity and whatnot, that seems to track.
Yeah.
And it seemed like when I was reading about this, it seemed like the 1920s were like a heyday for this device. These were like very, very popular. And what were they kind of used to treat?
What would you like it to treat? So hair growth was a big one. Pain. Really, they were marketed to cure just about anything. I mean, skin diseases, acne, even like pneumonia and ulcers. So like internal.
Do you have to stick it in your lung?
I wouldn't recommend it.
Well, I saw a couple of they were one was marketing it as you could treat like nasal discharge by putting up the nose for a couple of minutes. I mean, just like this glass tube that is shocking the inside of your nose. It sounds really fun. Like I'm sure you just don't care about your runny nose at that point. It's like,
Right.
I did that for 5 minutes. I don't know. I'm gonna leave. And then there was treating brain fog by putting it over the forehead and the eyes, and then I jumped down a YouTube rabbit hole of watching people use these and found like a video of a guy who had a 1920s edition and like a modern one, because they definitely still make these, and it's like terrifying. He took apart the 1920s edition, and the thing can deliver something like 50,000 volts into the glass tube, which then that gets curbed down. So when you're getting shocked on the skin, you're not getting 50,000 volts, but there's behind that generating 50,000 volts energy is like a beeswax coated cylinder of copper, some cloth insulation. And it's terrifying to think that that actually worked and didn't just blast people.
So it's just a pretty taser. Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of
really pretty.
That is actually, this is definitely the coolest looking device that of the ones that we've talked about. This just looks cool, and they still make these.
I just looked on Amazon, not in the US, but in the UK. You can buy one on Amazon.
Yep. Yeah. Well, Mike, I was gonna point this out. I mean, I know we're not an explicit show, but apparently, if you really want something like this, any adult store will have modern versions. I assume much more safe made than the 1920s edition, and how they are used I will just leave to the imagination, because we're not going to go there. But this is something that is still around, and I think it's impressive, right? You get this glowing purple blast of electricity. It does do something. It shocks the gentleman who was demonstrating it on YouTube. I mean, he could contract his forearm muscles because it does deliver that much.
Oh my gosh!
Yeah, and of course he's like taking off the glass tube so he can arc it and stuff. That stuff that I'm sure nobody would recommend we try at home.
I was going to say, the one that we use in the museum where you can experience it, it feels like just a little pinprick.
Yeah, that's that. I mean, I guess it certainly seems safer, but yeah, there you can, there in the glass tube can be like different. I saw one that was like a rake shape, and
that's so that you can grow hair.
Oh, that makes
it's
sense.
like a
I mean,
cone.
that one I think makes sense. I think the other ones seem dubious, but like, putting the glass rake of electricity over your head, yeah, I'm sure it does something.
I think it's too late for me, unfortunately.
Well, I think we should try. If we come visit, Laurie, can we try it and see if it does work on Aaron?
We could probably figure something out. Yeah.
Okay. Do you think we can turn it up a little bit too? Because I mean, that might be the problem. I think if it doesn't have enough
It's just not
energy.
strong enough.
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you. Thank
Exactly.
you. We'll do it. Look, with 3 physicians, nothing can go wrong. Mike will definitely be administering the treatment because I just, I don't want to be responsible for whatever happens, and we'll just see what happens. I don't see why that would be a problem. But I should also mention that apparently in the 1970s and the 1980s, the Chicago police used to use these as torture devices, or at least that came up in some sort of scandal. So maybe they're not so safe. But I still think we should try, Aaron.
Maybe they were just using it to treat brain fog, and then the criminal could remember everything they did. Now it's clear.
It's probably loosely true in a bad way. But what are you going to do? Well, I definitely want to come see all this stuff. And so one thing we have tried to elicit from a lot of the museums, Laurie, we like to elicit a promise that we can, if we can show up, that we like a couple of museums promise we could play with the amputation mimic kits and those sort of things. But I want to know if can we like promise that we get to shock Aaron or like put Mike in the orgone box or something like that?
Don't promise any of those things. None of those things.
I can promise that you can have the same experience that any visitor to the museum has in trying out in safe ways some of these devices and thinking about how we make healthcare decisions.
Are we worrying you in how we make healthcare decisions right now?
Maybe a little.
She's like, are they really doctors? They don't sound like doctors.
I was going to go to the ER, but I think I'm just going to go sit in the box.
I think that'd be safer.
An orgone box in the ER would at least be a nice place to relax.
Yeah. It's kind of
We
like
don't
the
really have
police
those in
room.
the ER, do we?
I don't know. I'm start prescribing it, and we have a lot of people come in and say, I just don't feel like myself, and I'm feeling kind of cloudy. I'm like, you know what you need? You need an orgone box.
Well, you could get orgone diffusers on Amazon. Like you said, there's a medallion.
Diffuser?
They're all
Orgone.
like, yeah, they're just
Well,
like
of course,
pyramids.
if it diffuses a magical substance that can't be seen or measured, then I'm sure somebody's made a diffuser for it.
Mhm.
Well, it's more expensive because if you can't see or measure it, it's
Right.
you obviously have to charge more. It's harder
It has to be finely
manipulate the
calibrated.
substance.
Yeah.
Well, that's a never-ending cycle of fun. And let's be clear to the listener, we haven't talked about everything that is there. There's so much more to the exhibit, and I know we're only scratching the surface. So, Laurie, I think that's that about does it for the moment. Is there anything else you wanted us to bring up, to highlight? Any other special exhibits, anything like that you'd want me to include here?
Well, we've always got new things happening. We always have new things happening at the museum. Right now, we have a special exhibit that's all about finding nature in your own backyard and how you don't have to go to these exotic places to enjoy that.
Yeah, I must say, especially for our listeners with little kids, this used to be one of our favorite stops of all ages, but we used to travel more to Minnesota more when the kids were younger. And it's a beautiful museum. It's a wonderful spot, and there's tons of things to do. So yeah, it's absolutely worth the visit.
Yeah, it does look fantastic.
So, yeah.
Well, and I have a paleontologist on my team, and he would say, "Don't forget to mention the dinosaurs."
Yeah, absolutely.
nice.
Yeah, there's some great displays.
I'm a 40-year-old child who still loves dinosaurs.
Yeah.
So
Does he walk around humming the Jurassic Park theme song?
He probably does.
Does he really?
He's a big fan. We have what we call it the Omni Theater, but it's basically an IMAX theater, and a big domed curved screen, and we showed the Jurassic Park movies there, but he did a narration over it, like, yeah, this isn't really real. This is
Oh my gosh,
That is awesome.
I
think
He needs to do an encore. I would love that. Oh,
I just read an article about that, how Jurassic Park just got it all wrong, and the velociraptors are the size of turkeys, and they shouldn't be that scary.
Well, that's like watching any medical show with us. We're just like, that's not the way. God.
Yeah, I would enjoy. I think he and I could be best friends. I love ruining a good time.
Oh man, that'd be perfect.
When you come to visit, I'll introduce you to all of our scientists.
Yes. We will do our best to ensure that you don't regret that decision. I promise you. Well, Laurie, I really appreciate you being on the show today. It's been awesome, and we will direct our listeners towards the museum. And if you go check out the museum, let us know, because we want to go see it ourselves, and I think we can put that on a 2023 list somewhere.
Yeah, for sure.
That sounds great. It's been fun chatting with you.
Yeah, thanks so
All right.
much for your time.
We appreciate everyone listening, and we'd love to hear from all of you out there. If you'd like to send us a message or provide feedback, we can be reached through our website, www.poorhistorianspod.com. There you will find links to all of our social media sites. We take emails at poorhistorianspod@gmail.com, and we work to respond to all posts on our various social media accounts. If you have time, please go and leave us a nice 5-star review on iTunes or on whichever platform you choose, and consider posting about the show on your social media. And if you do that, hey, feel free to tag us. Every single one of those things does help raise the show's profile, and we always appreciate when they happen. If you'd like to support the show in other ways, check out the Poor Historians merchandise, including t-shirts and mugs, by going over to our website and following the links. And with all that, this is Dr. Max with the Poor Historians Podcast, signing out. AMA. One thing when I moved to Milwaukee like 10 years ago that took me by surprise was that you could walk into pretty much every museum here and order a beer with, go walk around the domes where there's like a big horticultural museum, or you could go to like your regular science museum here in Milwaukee, and there, you can buy a beer and wander around. How much beer can we have when we go through?
Pre-pandemic, you could get a beer and walk around the museum. Unfortunately, when the pandemic hit, we lost our caterer, and we are still working on figuring that out. So at the moment, you can't buy a beer and wander around, but it has happened.
Bring our own beer in?
So late 2023 is what you're saying, once you get the catering guy.
Because we're working on it. And that was especially in the weekend evenings, because we do get a more adult audience, Thursday, Friday, Saturday evenings. And so people would get their alcohol and wander around the museum.
Yeah, didn't they do that in Milwaukee?
We'll bring a 12er with us, and we can all hang out.
You're going to have to bring it.
It'll be a good time.
Because I was up for a tournament. It had been a while since I was up in Minnesota, and I dropped my daughter off for a hockey meeting. I was like, I'll just run to the gas station and pick up some beer. So get the gas, go in, and like, there isn't any beer. Like, I'll just run over to Walmart, run into Walmart. There's no beer. And then that guy's like, just go to Target. Went to Target, no beer. And then I started to feel like an alcoholic. I think I'm just going to go.
The fourth place. You're like,
I'm just going to go back to the hotel. Beerless.
Here in Wisconsin, you could drop somebody off at daycare and they will give you a beer.
Got to go to the liquor store here.
Yeah, it's not the worst thing. Really, when you think about it, like, it's probably very unhealthy here.
There was, that's definite. What was the other thing? When I visited my friend this summer up in Duluth, they had like every gas station, like didn't have beer, but they had like rice. Every gas station had like wild rice or something.
Yeah. I think that's just a northern.
Yeah. What is that about? I was just like, what?
Oh, it's a Dakota or more Ojibwe. It's like what so the lakes here used to be covered with wild rice. Now there's just a few up north, and there's a lot of treaty rights, and we also do water research as part of my group at the museum. And so we're working with the tribes right now to show that some of the lakes were actually rice lakes, wild rice lakes. So we do these DNA, we do cores, sediment cores, and then we're looking for DNA of the rice in the cores so that we can show historically it was a ricing lake and that they should have rights to it. And the white people have polluted them so much that there are very few rice. But anyway, it's a delicacy. It's really good. It's actually a grass, not a rice.
Okay.
And it's delicious.
Can I say that answer to that question was way more fascinating than I thought it was?
Yeah, that was awesome.
I was like, oh no, this is just some like driving through Florida. Every place has boiled peanuts, and it was just kind of their thing. So
boiled
I thought
peanuts?
boiled peanuts.
Who
Yeah,
would boil a peanut?
Look, this is one of these things that you're going to have one and you're going to go one of two directions. It's going to be something you crave and desire for the rest of your life, or you will never want one again. And I am camp A. Like, I had these and they're like Cajun and they're like super spicy, and oh man, it was amazing. But it's a weird texture. If you boil a peanut, it turns it into like a meaty, it almost tastes like meat. It's very strange. And yeah, like I had a whole styrofoam cup of these. That's how you, at the roadside gas station in the middle of nowhere, Florida, that I bought them. Sure,
That
that's
sounds
all
gross.
very sanitary. No,
Sounds
it was
so
delicious.
gross.
You're wrong. And my wife was like, "Yep, I don't need one of those ever again."